I'm Lauren. This is Millie. Millie, what does Mom do for work? Yeah. That's a really good guess. I help cities and I help school districts borrow money, fill up their piggy banks. And then they use that money to build schools and roads and buildings. Does that sound cool? Yeah? What do you wish Mom did for a job? Well, that certainly would be more exciting, but alas, it's not in the cards.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Chris Cummings, and I'm the Interim Director for Business Oregon. I appreciate you all joining. Today's discussion is going to be about how to consider and work with infrastructure improvements in your community during tough economic times. Before we get into that, I'd like to thank again, you saw the video from Piper Sandler about sponsorship. They are having sponsors for these meetings is extremely important, and it allows us to bring the information that we have to share with you. So thank you again, Piper Sandler, for sponsoring this event today. With that said, we are going to talk about infrastructure improvements, and we all know that difficult economic times are probably coming for a year or two or more, depending on who you're listening to. And it's so vitally important that we keep our infrastructure, obviously, in a wonderful state, but keep those planned improvements moving forward. Because obviously the economy, it works in cycles, and one day we will be back in an upcycle. And we'll need those infrastructure improvements to be able to attract business, growth to our communities, and so on. All of those improvements are, in fact, extremely important, particularly to economic development, as we consider how we want to grow businesses in our community or attract businesses. So before we get into our general discussion about things to consider with infrastructure improvement, I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel here and frankly, let them introduce themselves and give a quick update on, or a quick briefing on who they are and where they're from. So with that, we'll start with Eric.
Yes, my name is Eric Nurden. I am with the USDA Rural Development in their Community Programs Department. I am an area specialist. My background is in small business ownership and commercial banking, and looking forward to telling more about our program as we go on.
Great, thanks for being here today, Eric. Really appreciate it. Nikki?
I'm Nikki Iverson. I'm the Water Director for the City of Hillsborough. I also serve as the General Manager for the Joint Water Commission. We serve drinking water to most of Washington County, and we manage several other commissions overseeing different types of infrastructure. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Nikki, for joining. And it's also important to note that Nikki was a former Infrastructure Finance Authority board member, so has a ton of experience in different programs and projects around the state. And Lauren?
Good morning. I'm Lauren McMillan. I'm with Piper Sandler. We are a full service investment bank, and I help municipalities borrow money to finance capital projects.
Well, thanks for joining us, Lauren. Look forward to hearing your presentation, and I'm sure everybody else does. To get back to Business Oregon, as I mentioned, I am the interim director now at Business Oregon. And it's somewhat, as I travel the state and talk to different communities like you listening, I find that sometimes folks don't understand or aren't really fully aware of what we do at Business Oregon. We are the state's economic development entity. We work from anything from business development to infrastructure, financing, and development projects to global trade and so on. So we do offer many programs, over 70, that sometimes it's difficult to navigate. So we do have field people that help us, or I should say help you work through the different protocols and programs that we have to understand financing. One of our biggest program areas is infrastructure financing. About 75% of our budget goes into infrastructure financing. primarily in loan funds, but we do have grant funds, and I'll get into that in a moment. To us, as an economic development entity, infrastructure is the basis of all economic development. Certainly, you can't have business growth without an appropriate water supply or wastewater treatment facilities. It could even extend out into areas such as transportation infrastructure, park infrastructure. If you're in the recruitment area of economic development, certainly those companies that come to the state and look at your community, they don't just look at the plot of land necessarily. They are looking at water capacity. They are looking at where their employees might live. So that brings in quality of life for those employees, parks, road access, and so on. So it's important that we keep moving forward with infrastructure. Now, one of the things that we do here in down economic times is that infrastructure is so darn expensive. How am I going to finance that? I certainly can't ask my citizens to finance and pay more money to build these infrastructure projects down the road. That may be true in some areas, but infrastructure projects generally take, as we see them, multiple years, 3 to 5 years, depending on where you are in the process. So it's important, if we're not going to work, say, on actual infrastructure construction right now, that we take a leading role. Now is a perfect time to begin planning, to consider what your infrastructure needs might be in the community. Perhaps you have it worked down to a point where you need a wastewater treatment plant. Start planning and engineering that transportation or that wastewater plant, so that when times become a little bit better economically, then you are ready to go. You and your community are ready to go on that financing for that plant. Also, when we have planning in place, it helps us as communities to gain access to different funding, and some of which you'll hear about today. Federal funding or state funding. People want to know that you're ready to go when you're asking them for money. With that, we as Business Oregon have what we call the Infrastructure Finance Authority, and many of our infrastructure funding programs live within that authority. Not only do we finance regular construction projects, we also have grants available, small grants for planning, because we recognize the importance of planning, and we recognize that communities may not want to take on financing such as loans for planning projects that some think may never materialize or may need to change as the times change. So we do have information and financing that can help communities with that planning element. Along those lines, we also have a project where we work with all of our partners on this call, well, almost all of our partners on this call, that we call one-stop financing meetings. And basically what this meeting is we arrange for a meeting with all of the financing partners for a particular type of project. And then those partners go through the types of financing they have and what it might mean to the city and or county as a loan project. So for instance, you may have a water system that needs upgrading. We'll invite all the relevant funders to these one-stop meetings and discuss your project. And some funders may today have better terms than other funders. Some funders may have more grant to their ability to fund your project. And we just go through them so that you can understand what options are at your disposal as you're looking to finance these projects. With accessing that one-stop program, we use our regional development officers, which many of you know. We have 12 regional development officers across the state, and you can reach out to those regional development officers. The information is on our website on how to contact them, and then they'll get the ball rolling with the appropriate people within our department and other departments on how you might finance an infrastructure improvement program. With that said, I think that I'm going to turn it over to our partners here in a moment, but I think, frankly, it's so vitally important not to stop infrastructure projects during these times. Whether it's delaying them, that might be one issue that your city may need to consider, but it's very important to keep considering how you're going to plan the project, how you're going to finance the project, or seeking the financing. One of the other things, just as a perk, and I think we'll hear from our partners here, is that with a downturn in the economy, when we talk about infrastructure financing, particularly loans, the interest rates are very low, just like they are for people right now refinancing their houses. We can see a rush in that. Well, our interest rates from our department are extremely low, such as around 2% for 30-year terms. And we can work with communities to really build those terms and how the communities may need them to finance their projects. But just to give you an idea, that is an extremely low rate for long-term infrastructure financing. And it's now's the time to be looking and considering these things. So with that, I will pass this off to Eric Nerden from USDA, because they have a host of fabulous programs for infrastructure financing. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Eric. If you would take it away, please.
So appreciate the introduction, Chris. USDA Rural Development does have a lot of different financing options, particularly for infrastructure. I do like to, whenever I'm making a presentation, spend some time telling about the other aspects of USDA Rural Development as well. We do have the ability to kind of grow and help communities grow from the ground up. We're part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We got lots of different offices. Also, I just realized that I probably have way more slides than are needed, so some of these will probably get clicked through relatively quickly without me touching a lot on it. A presentation isn't that good if I'm just reading the slides anyway, so I'll try not to do that. So as mentioned, we can help build communities from the ground up. We have kind of three different arms: the rural business, cooperative service, housing, and utilities. We have programs that can help single family, multifamily, and community facilities, grants and loan programs. We also have programs that can help with telecommunications, electric programs, and then one of the ones that I work closely with is the water and environmental programs, as well as the community facility programs that we'll talk about more as well. The business programs help the small business community in rural areas. Here's a map just showing our regions. We definitely deal with rural is our focus, so that's defined by population, and it varies on the type of program, but it ranges from 10,000 all the way up to 50,000, depending on the program. These slides, next slides, are just highlighting our four main programs: single family housing, multifamily housing, the business and cooperative, and then the community programs, which has the infrastructure programs that probably most of the people participating in this conference are most interested in: the community facilities, water and wastewater, broadband, telecommunication, and telemedicine. We do like to show how our investments go in rural Oregon. So here's a chart just showing the breakout in the money that's invested in rural Oregon. One thing that's coming up is beginning real soon, October 1st, is a OneRD Guarantee Loan Initiative. And this is a program that's going to streamline and simplify loan guarantees for the programs listed on this screen. The other thing that it does is it is eligible for communities up to 50,000 people, which is kind of on the larger side of the communities that we deal with. So it's always good news when the federal government is trying to streamline and make things easier, for sure. So the focus for this session is the Water and Environmental Program, which is our acronym, which we have lots of those as the WEP. And then we also have the Community Facility Program, which often is just referred to as the CF program. So here's the, I guess, kind of a little bit of a dashboard showing our investments that we've done in the state, just about USDA. But as Chris mentioned, the partners that are part of this panel and others the Business Oregon, and the other programs out there. We really partner well together to get these projects funded and moving along to help your communities. Again, our focus is on rural. Kind of one of the mantras that we have is to serve the smallest population with the most need based on average household income. We do a good job of, I guess you guys, all the borrowers out there do a good job of keeping our delinquency rate down, so that's awesome. These are the different entities that are eligible for our water and environmental programs. So we work a lot with cities, counties, special districts, and also tribes. So that looks like a duplicate slide. So anyway, we have eligible projects. Basically, in this program, it's to construct, expand, repair, or otherwise improve a water, wastewater, or solid waste system. Chris also mentioned interest rates. Rates across the board are extremely low. Our rates are listed here right now. Market rate is the 2.125 for these type of programs. We also have a really attractive up to 40-year repayment period, which keeps that payment very manageable. We also have grants. So the grants are impacted by the median household income. So we can do up to 75% of a project. We are currently using the 2010 census data, so that will change as we get new census data approved, but that's where we're at now. So we often do a combination of loan and grant to make projects happen, and often will involve with other funders as well. We do have environmental and engineering requirements that are involved. Some of the projects funded through this program are listed here. We did the water tower at Crooked River Ranch, Coburn Wastewater Project. Then the next couple slides will just show some details on some of the other projects. So I'll just kind of show those and move on. City of Hood River, Parkdale Sanitary District, we just completed this one. There's also grants for assisting in pre-planning and getting your preliminary engineering report and environmental reviews ready to go. And also emergency community water assistance grants. This is particularly important now with the fires impacting a lot of water sources and water systems. So that's available. And I know that our field staff is out there trying to see if there's need and where we can help. Community facility program. This is another loan and grant program where we work with public bodies, tribes, and nonprofit organizations to build a wide variety of projects. Eligible community facilities can be healthcare, public facilities, community support services, and we can also do equipment for these entities as well, not just buildings and that type of thing. Again, we have great interest rates, and we have good long loan repayment terms. This slide shows some of the criteria on how we look at the data as far as population and median household income to determine grant eligibility. So the lower the population and the lower the median household income, then the higher the grant amount goes. It's also contingent upon funds available, and typically it's $50,000 or less. Here's a list of some of the projects that we have funded, and I'll show some pictures in the following slides. So we've done hospitals, food systems, fire stations. Again, eligibility for these. We do, one of the things, once the loan's done, we do service the loans. Payments are made typically annually to our department, and the field staff are out reviewing audits, doing security inspections, being on site. We try to get to know the operators of the system, the finance people with the different organizations, and try to develop relationships with them as well. There is technical assistance available to our customers through RCAC and OAWU, and then we also have technical assistance through our program as well. Here's a map showing our area specialists in their area. So that's a great starting point. If you have any questions, you can always call me directly, but I'm just the one that happens to be presenting. Your experts are out in your areas. You can apply through RD Apply, which is an online portal, and it's pretty handy, although it does have some learning to get used to as well. Different people can use the RD Apply, project engineer, the applicant, and other staff involved. Here's the reasons for using RD Apply, and it's another reason is it's how you apply for our programs. Contact information listed. Oh, here's the small print. I forgot that they added that on there. And that's a wrap up for our program. So glad that was able to present that. Look forward to question and answers coming later. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. That was, I appreciate that presentation. And I do think, you know, the USDA has a ton of programs. We have programs. There are so many different other funding entities, particularly when it comes to infrastructure finance. But rest assured, we all, like Eric had said, we all work together. And it can certainly be confusing if you're a small community and you're only doing one infrastructure program or project for, you know, 20 years. So I think it's really important, as Eric had showed, his contacts, USDA's contacts, and our contacts. Really what you need to do as a community member is reach out and touch someone, right? Like the old commercial goes, but reach out, tell people what you want to do, and then the rest of us, because we work together so well, we'll make sure that we put you in touch with the right folks. So I just point that out, that it's really important. With that, we're going to go over to Nikki, who has some fine discussions to share with us, and look forward to hearing that as well.
Right, can you hear me okay? And the screen is showing, okay. So, to get started, as a true infrastructure geek, I usually introduce myself as part of what we manage on the infrastructure side. So as I mentioned earlier, Hillsborough is the managing agency for several commissions that manage drinking water supply in Washington County, including a water treatment plant, large transmission lines, finished water storage tanks, and source water supply. So I did serve for 6 years as the city's representative to Infrastructure Finance Authority Board, which was a great experience. So I'm really bringing the utility and local government city perspective to this presentation. So I'm going to talk about infrastructure decisions and processes related to connecting with your community, financial considerations, resiliency, some cost management strategies, things to think about shovel-ready sites, and a few other utility strategies to consider while you're embarking on infrastructure investments. So one of the things that's really important when you work at a city is to connect with your community, because we have to sell doing these projects and associated rate increases to our elected officials, but also to our community. And so know what's important to them and tailor your investments to their values. So in Hillsborough, we periodically do community surveys, and those have consistently come back with the same values from our community, such as protection of public health is really the #1 value that they have. Planning for the future has always come up as well. And maintaining our water system so it's always available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So for the financial considerations, really this gets down to your water rate comparisons and knowing where you stand in your community on your water rates. Sorry, I meant water rates. So we do comparisons not only locally with local cities in our area, in the Portland metro area, so you might want to consider that in your county, but also in the region, like how do you stand and how does that compare to the affordability for your community? And as Chris said, it's really important as you're looking at doing this planning that you meet with your IFA, regional coordinator, I think they're regional development officers, if I get that right, and hire a financial consultant. It's actually not that expensive, and it's really important to have a financial consultant on board as you're working through these issues with the state to see what kind of options are available. You'll want to do a rate and SDC study because you really do want to have those conversations with your city council about, how much room do you have and what kind of increases are they willing to consider. It's really a cost-benefit analysis in those discussions with them. We'll also talk a little bit about emergency utilities assistance programs, especially now when we're in a pandemic, but it also is really important to have those programs available to your customers if you can afford them, and some cost management strategies. So since we're in the middle of a pandemic, I wanted to touch on utility assistance programs, and these are really important resources to have as you're going to do cost increases and rate increases for your community, because you will get people coming back and saying, why are you doing this during an emergency, a pandemic, or other things that could happen in different years. So fortunately in Washington County, we were able to partner with the county to obtain some funding out of the CARES Act for utility bill relief for water, wastewater. And so it's really a program that's available. I know that hasn't been the option for everyone in the state, but we're hoping that that can be broadened as more relief packages come from the federal government into the state and into counties and cities in Oregon. But it provides that government assistance for those folks that have been severely impacted. The program in our county ends December 30th, 2020, so it's really only available through the calendar year. So we're really trying to get that message out to our community to take advantage of that, if you've been impacted while it's available. We also have a city utility bill assistance program. We try to set up, flexible payments plans for customers that are struggling, but we do have a program where they can get assistance with a couple of bills while they're in the middle of an emergency. This just becomes an important tool in your toolbox to have those programs available as you're moving forward with water rate increases, because inevitably there's this up and down in the economy. And if you're doing a long project like we are, you're gonna hit a recession eventually. So I'm gonna go into a little bit more about some of the reasons that we've been able to save costs at Hillsborough and for you guys to consider as you're looking at investments. Partnerships has been one of the main strategies. We've been able to build a lot of these large infrastructure projects because we partnered with other jurisdictions. We couldn't afford to build these water supply projects on our own, and this really saves the fixed cost to spread. You can split that amongst all your partners and really help the economy of your whole region if that's available to you. One thing I'd mention on partnerships though is you do have to invest in those partnerships, which means you really need to come to the table and look at what everybody's wants and needs are and not just your own perspective, and make sure you all keep your goal and what you're trying to achieve together and your objective, really in front of you as you're navigating some of those challenges that come up through projects. So really quickly, I had mentioned that we are also building a new water supply project. As Chris mentioned, some of these projects take many years. This is a project that has taken over 10 years. We really started this program in 2015, and we're expected to have the whole system operational by 2026. It's over $1 billion, but it includes upgrading a water intake on the Willamette River in Wilsonville, a new state-of-the-art treatment plant, and 30 miles of large transmission line, and a couple of finished water storage tanks. So it's really important to look at financing when you're having these long projects, but also to manage how the costs flow through the project. Here's another example. Not only did we partner with Beaverton and the Tualatin Valley Water District to build this new water supply, but we've looked for opportunities where new roads were going in, and we put our pipelines in when those roads were going in. So that saved money with the road jurisdictions. We partnered with Washington County on 124th Avenue project, and we saved millions of dollars both for the county transportation and for the water supply project. Partnered with City of Wilsonville on a new Kinsman Road project, and then we partnered with a developer in South Hillsborough while they were building a road. So the more partnerships that you can look at to spread those fixed costs, the more your whole region can save money if that's available. Another thing to consider while you're investing right now, especially as we're having all these different emergencies occur in our state, the pandemic and wildfires, is really looking at investing in resilient infrastructure. When we have companies come to Hillsborough and they want to invest, they really want certainty and they want to know that the water is there when they need it. And so this is an example of an investment that we made and was completed in 2015. We built a standby power generation facility. In the windstorm event that occurred at the end of Labor Day weekend, a transmission line went down for our treatment plant that serves most of Washington County. Because we had this standby power facility, we also had a partnership with Portland General Electric. We were able to maintain those pretty high water demands that are higher than our usual September from the hot weather that we had experienced for several days. But we had this power for several days from standby power until PGE could get the transmission lines fixed. And so that's just a good example when you're going to talk to your city council or your community about what is the importance of what you're building and why. And our community does expect that water and that to be flowing out of that tap 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But you do need to communicate to them, this is investing in this infrastructure is how you make that happen. Otherwise, we could have been several days without water supply for Washington County, and that would not have been good for people fighting fires and other things we needed to really have that supply available. So this is really, I'm not going to go over the detail, and I shamefully stole Chris's logo and probably added the wrong color to the back, but I think you'll appreciate that. But really look at your state programs, looking at funding partnerships. Again, this is another opportunity where you can kind of cobble different options available. There's a lot of different business recruitments that happen through the state. We've partnered with Business Oregon. These companies come in and they want to look at sites. They might be bringing some money to the table, but you also might have some money because you were building a project in a certain area. We're also looking at flexibility in policies right now. We are required as local governments to finance SDCs for residential customers, but you may want to look at, is that something you're willing to do, and can you afford to do it for other types of customers, like a hotel that might be coming in or a business that might be coming in. May not be available for every type of SDC, but I think looking at the policies that you have is really important so that we can help our economy and keep the jobs rolling while we're in a recession. There's also a lot of different grant and funding that you can help with city match funding. So at Hillsborough, when we were looking at building a road in North Hillsborough to attract future businesses, we received a grant from Business Oregon to put the water line in. This was great because then it didn't impact our customers and their water rates, but also had that shovel-ready site available to go with water, and we were able to attract an important business to our community. So shovel-ready sites. This is something I don't work on and manage directly, but we have a community development department at the City of Hillsborough and an economic development staff within that department that really focus on that. So if your city can really dedicate a staff person or even hire a consultant to look at what it takes to get a shovel-ready site, that's really important. As Chris mentioned, there could be funding available, but like he said, planning. When businesses come and you don't even know what it takes to build something or how much it costs, and they will move on to someone else that does. And so what this means is you need to work with multiple city departments. You need to think about water, streets, sewer, storm, all of those different types of infrastructure investments, and have people come together to coordinate and develop a plan. So not only conceptual, but you may want to even do preliminary design so that it's ready to go. And if you can do advanced design and permitting, that's really a great thing to think about, and see if there's funds at the state to do that. One thing that we hear from companies that come in is they really want to know how long it's going to take to get through the permitting process at the city to develop. So that's another thing to look at is what are your timelines? Are there ways that you can shorten that permitting review or have some concurrent reviews available if possible and if the regulations allow? Provide certainty. That gets back to timelines. People want to know, what do they have to do? What do they have to build? And how expensive is it? And lastly, how long is it going to take? So if a business is really rolling, you know, they may look at a community that can provide that service faster than another one. So providing that certainty and knowing what that is up front is incredibly important. I'm just going to keep plugging Chris's programs, and I swear he did not ask me to do that, but from my experience on the Infrastructure Finance Authority Board, there's so many good options that the state has available and the federal government that you should really be taking advantage of those if you can. So debt, this is kind of the big one for utilities to be thinking about because these projects are not cheap. However, as they said, interest rates are really low. For our Willamette project, Hillsborough financed a water revenue bond. I think it was around 2.3 to 2.4%, which is really low. That was last summer, $50 million. We also secured a WIFIA loan, which is the Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. And I think we have Senator Merkley to also thank for helping that become a law and a program that we have available to us. But we were closed at 1.98% for $250 million. That is an incredible interest rate for that large of a loan, and has also allowed us to lower our interest rates to our customers long-term, and has helped us looking at other infrastructure projects we may now have capacity to do. So again, look at these federal and state programs. There's a lot of different programs. Different programs will meet your needs for different reasons. That's why getting that one-stop shop together at IFA is really important, because they can kind of help you tailor the best programs to how your investment and how much you can afford and what you're trying to build when. Again, as I said, meet with your IFA Regional Development Officer. One last plug I'd like to make is I think it's important to also look at diversifying your debt portfolio. One of the things that Hillsborough did is we did have a water revenue bond and also a WIFIA loan. We did that initially because we could only finance, I think, about 50% of the Willamette project with WIFIA. So we did have to go out and look at a revenue bond. We started hearing that there may be options from the federal government to refinance, well, they actually call it re-execute the WIFIA program for a lower interest rate. But one of the terms that we heard from EPA was you can't draw on your loan to do that. So if you've already drawn on the loan, you cannot refinance it. So instead, we had the water revenue bond, and we're able to draw on that first while we saw if this was going to be an opportunity for us. Right now, we're working on closing our reissuance of our WIFIA loan at about 1.35%. And so that is something I just really want to get across to people, that if you can get debt when interest rates are low, it really helps you out, because when the economy is really high, those interest rates are going to be much higher and you can do a lot less during that time frame. So really keep that in mind. Look at what you're able to do for your community now. And lastly, I'd like to plug that 95% of the money spent on the Willamette supply system to date has gone to local employees and goods and services. This has really been a value that we have promoted throughout this program, and it's something that our communities are really invested in. But investing that money back in jobs and manufacturing in your own community will just help us get out of this recession sooner. Some of the best things that you can do for getting out of recession is investing in infrastructure. That's kind of my last plug, Chris, and I'll be looking forward to answering questions at the end of the session.
Well, thank you, Nikki. I appreciate that. And I guess I do owe you coffee for those plugs, but that's at another day. Nikki's community is super forward thinking in how they look at infrastructure, and I think that's wonderful. And there's a lot of lessons for many of us to learn from that. But well, at the same time, some of you watching are probably from communities that have 2, 3, 4 staff that work for your city, and it's quite difficult to think of doing all our routine work, day-to-day work, and then asking some staff member to be able to think about upgrading your water system. That's a lot of work. So there are ways to work with that and help add capacity for some of you communities who need it. And I think going back to what I had mentioned earlier about reaching out, you're not alone. So whether you reach out to Business Oregon or DEQ or USDA or and the governor's regional solutions team, whoever you know that works for the state in your community, reach out to them and say, this is what I want to do. How do I get started? There's no point in sitting there alone and trying to think about it. And frankly, the answer is no unless you ask. So you need to ask for that assistance if you need it, and financing. With that, we're talking about public financing here, and many times people think, oh, I need to go to the government to get money. But Nikki brought up a great point about private sector. Sometimes private sector money, it works better for your community. There are a variety of reasons for that. But here to talk about some of that is Lauren, who, again, we don't always tie in, but I think it's an important element of our financing system that we hear about different options for financing our projects. So Lauren, with that, please take it away.
All right, thank you, Chris. So, again, I'm Lauren McMillan with Piper Sandler. So a little background on me. I've been working in public finance for 14 years. I started my career in Arizona and then moved up to Portland in 2009. So I spent the last 11 years in Oregon working with the Seattle Northwest team that became Piper Jaffray, and we're now Piper Sandler. And over the years, I've been able to work with a variety of cities, counties, park and rec districts, school districts, community colleges all over the state. And these are just a few of the cities I've had the pleasure to work with over the years. I do work as the City of Hillsborough's financial advisor and was able to help them with that large project that Nikki was just talking about, helped sell their revenue bonds last summer, and also worked on the WIFIA loan. Basically, what we do is, there's a lot of service providers that may come into play on a large infrastructure project, but our angle is we just help on the financing part specifically. Depending on the method of sale, I'll work in various roles, either as financial advisor, an underwriter, or a placement agent. And while some of the tasks for those different roles may be different, the main job is the same. We structure the repayment of the debt, and we organize the financing team to get the deal done. I kind of feel like a team captain sometimes. Debt can be sold in the public market to many investors or directly to a bank in a placement. There are various factors to evaluate and consider to determine which method may be best for a particular issue, and a consultant like myself can help cities figure that out. Municipalities can borrow for lots of different projects, and depending on the project, you're going to pledge different revenues. Either property taxes, general full faith and credit, water revenues, sewer revenues, even tax increment. Definitely keeps things interesting from my perspective. We've heard from Eric and Chris about some of the state and federal loan programs available to cities, and compared to the bond market, those programs may be able to offer more flexible structures like a drawdown loan, more competitive and subsidized interest rates, forgivable loans, grants, lower rate covenant requirements, and more flexible call provisions, just to name a few things. So I definitely encourage folks to review those options first and see what might be available. And then sometimes for different reasons, you may find that those programs don't offer the best fit or aren't available to your jurisdiction. And then in that case, folks can look to the bond market for financing. I say the bond market, it's written there in quotes, just because that's kind of a general term thrown out a lot, and it covers more than just bonds, really any sort of municipal borrowing, and covers public offerings and placements. So you may have heard that interest rates are low. I don't think we can say that enough here. And you may have been living under a rock. You may not have heard that before, but you've definitely heard it now in this presentation. So you may be wondering how they've fared with COVID, and luckily the markets are functioning pretty well right now. So this graph shows a barometer for the taxable market, that's the US Treasuries in blue, and the tax-exempt municipal market, that's the Municipal Market Data Index, the MMD, in orange. MMD is an index of where high-grade, natural AAA rated bonds are trading, and it gives us an idea of where the market is at. For anyone not familiar, tax-exempt debt can only be sold by municipalities, and it means the interest income that investors receive is not subject to taxation. So therefore, they're willing to accept a lower interest rate. It's a very good deal for municipalities. As I said, lucky for us, markets are largely functioning as normal now. In March, we did experience, I think, what folks are referring to as the COVID shock. You can see that in the inset. And the MMD index went up 2% in less than 2 weeks. That is a huge move in our realm. It was very scary to a lot of people. And treasuries, you can see on the graph, didn't spike as much, but that's really deceiving because the taxable muni market was in no better shape than the tax exempt. Municipal debt prices at a spread to treasuries, and that spread widened out significantly, over 3% at one point. Investors were scared, so they put their money where they think it is safe, treasuries, and are reluctant to buy other types of debt. So spreads go up as the demand decreases. It created a few tough weeks when issues were scheduled to sell, and we had no idea when or if rates were going to come back down. I think everyone in the finance community was having flashbacks of 2008 when credit dried up and it was very difficult to get deals done, and it lasted for several months and took a very long time for things to come back down. So in this case, investors were actually pleased by the federal stimulus that was passed at the end of March, and right after that, rates came back down most of the way pretty sharply. And then over the summer, they've continued to drift back down until we got to the point of new historical lows. So right now, in short, municipalities are able to borrow for very low rates, as you've heard. Even if you're not thinking about borrowing for a new project, you may be thinking about refunding. So refunding is a refinancing of your existing debt. And you may lock in your interest rate for 20 to 30 years when you are completing these new infrastructure projects. And at some point, the opportunity may present to lower that rate. Similar to refinancing your mortgage, which, I mean, if you haven't done that recently, I mean, look into it. We're actually closing ours this week. So you may be thinking now, should I refund my existing debt? Well, oftentimes we'll get clients that give us a call and want to know if they can do a refunding. And the most important and first question I ask is, when is your outstanding debt callable or prepayable, and when? So unlike your mortgage that likely allows you to prepay at any time, there are often different restrictions on when and how you can prepay your municipal debt. Most debt sold in the public market is callable 10 years from when you sell it. So debt that was sold in 2010 becomes callable this year. Any bonds that mature before the call date can't be prepaid, therefore they can't be refunded for savings. State, federal, or bank loans may have earlier, more flexible call provisions. Thus, you may be able to prepay a loan that was done in 17 now. The call date also matters because it dictates the tax status for the refunding bonds. So when Congress passed the big tax reform bill at the end of 2017, one item included was the elimination of tax-exempt advance refundings. So remember, tax-exempt debt comes at a lower interest rate. Well, municipalities generally want to sell tax-exempt debt if they can. There are restrictions, which I don't have time to get into right now, but municipalities now have less opportunities to refinance and save money because they eliminated that. So we have two types of refundings. A current refunding just means the refunding debt closes within 90 days of the call date. These can be done on a tax-exempt basis. Of course, that's only if the original debt was tax exempt. An advance refunding means refunding debt closes more than 90 days ahead of the call date. So if you sold bonds publicly in 2012, they are callable in 22. And if you wanted to refund right now, it would be an advance refunding, and you can't simply sell tax exempt debt to do it. Doesn't mean there aren't options, just means they're a little more complicated. Most often, municipalities are selling refundings taxably. Current taxable rates are still higher than current tax exempt rates. However, rates have come down so much compared to historical rates, you may still be able to generate savings on a taxable basis. This is the most straightforward option. Other options listed here are forward delivery, meaning you sell tax exempt now and lock in rates, but investors don't take possession until the closing, which is set far into the future, within 90 days ahead of the call date. There's also Cinderella bonds, which start as taxable and magically turn into tax exempt debt at a later date. It really is kind of magical. There's also cash optimization, where if you have cash you're going to use to finance new projects, you use it instead to pay down debt and then borrow for those new projects on a tax exempt basis. So there is another effort in Congress to bring back tax exempt advance refundings. It may have a chance this time, but we're hearing that it's not likely until after the election, if at all. So one thing to keep in mind is that the market is constantly changing, literally from 1 minute to the next. And that's what volatility measures. How much are rates moving at a given time? For any transaction that you're working on, whether it's a refunding or a new money, it can take a month or two before your interest rate is actually locked in. So volatility matters. Essentially, entities risk starting a refunding and not getting it done before the market moves, or estimating debt service for a new project and rates go up significantly before you actually borrow. So that's why it's important to include a cushion over current rates when you're estimating new debt. The top graph here measures volatility, how much rates are moving. And you can see that towards the right side of the graph, in 2020, volatility spiked earlier this year and still remains pretty high. Volatility is also forecasted to increase this fall with the election uncertainty and rising COVID cases, among other factors. So the lower chart shows the spread between different credits. All municipal debt is not created equal, and publicly offered debt receives a credit rating, just like a grade you would get in school from a rating agency. AAA is the best, followed by AA, which is still very high credit quality. And that's displayed on the chart in blue. Next is the single A category, which is slightly weaker, but still indicates a low risk of default. That is in orange. And then BBB is the lowest investment grade rating category and indicates a medium risk of default, here in yellow. So you can see in general, the worse the credit, the higher the interest rate. Investors want to be compensated for taking on more risk. This chart shows that when the economy is good, investors are confident, credit spreads can narrow, but when things get tough, the weaker credits are hit harder.
And Lauren, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a minute or two left because we want to leave some room for questions. So if you could just keep.
This is my last slide, coincidentally. So, if you're curious about credit ratings, you may be wondering what impact COVID may have on your existing rating if you have one. Well, so far the rating agencies are evaluating the impact of COVID and have not been overly quick to act, which is good. Moody's and S&P both did assign a negative outlook to the entire US public finance sector earlier this year, but they're not going around downgrading everyone just yet. They recognize not all sectors and credits have been impacted equally. Areas that have been hit harder are the ones that you would expect. Tourism, so airports, the fact that folks are remote working and not driving as much, so gas taxes are down, toll roads are impacted, mass transit. Colleges have gone to a lot of remote learning, so that presents a lot of uncertainty for higher ed. And then income taxes and sales tax, are thought to be potentially impacted, but to date, these have actually fared a lot better than expected. Property tax revenues for GO bonds are stable, but vulnerable to declines nonetheless. Remote work opportunities are allowing people to move to lower cost areas. Also, corporations may reduce their office space, and then we may be looking at higher delinquencies in the short term. Basically, strong liquidity is going to allow some local governments to better withstand the economic slowdown and avoid this distress. Folks that were already in a tougher financial situation are going to have a much harder time. Also, it's not all bad. Upgrades are still possible. Moody's upgraded the Oregon local government pension pools in June. So, also, individual issuers are also seeing upgrades if it's warranted. So on that positive note, I will turn it over to Tracy to facilitate the Q&A.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm just going to jump in here for a minute because that's fabulous information, and the outlook is really helpful too. I think as we're thinking about moving forward, where are we going to go? Do we want to continue our infrastructure project? Well, yes, the outlook is good because Lauren says, no, we won't hold you to that, Lauren, but the outlook is good and we should continue, as I said earlier, and as all of our speakers said, continue moving forward on those infrastructure projects and planning and construction, or wherever it is you may be in your thought process for these projects. With that, I want to thank all the speakers here today, Lauren, Eric, and Nikki. Great perspectives. I think we can all learn from that. And I think as folks think about their financing, know that there's people out there that do infrastructure financing and projects all the time. So why not use their expertise? Thanks for joining us.